Alright, in today's video, we're going to look at writing equations of lines when you're just given a slope and 1 point. So, the formula for today's problems is going to be called point-slope form. So make sure you put today's date in the top corner. Alright, so the formula for point-slope form is y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. So remember, m is your slope. x1, y1 should be familiar. Those are the coordinates for 1 point. So x1, y1 are just the coordinates for a point on the line. So let's look at some examples. We're going to write equations given the slope and a point. So let's say the slope was -3 and the point was 4, 2. So I'm going to label the point x1, y1. So now I know what my x1 and my y1 values are. And now all we're really doing is taking these numbers and plugging them into the formula. So I don't have anything to plug in for y. I do have something to plug in for y1, and then I do have something to plug in for x1 and m. So when I rewrite this, y minus 2 equals -3 times x minus 4. So notice I put the y1 in the y1 spot and the x1 in the x1 spot. And because there's a minus in the formula, these change their sign. So it becomes -2 and then -4. And so now we could rewrite this equation. I would distribute first. So I have y minus 2 equals -3x. -3 times x is -3x. -3 times -4 is +12. And then to get the y by itself, I could rewrite and then I have my equation. So I used the slope and 1 point to plug in values into this formula, and then from that formula I was able to simplify it back to a form that we're used to seeing in point slope or in slope intercept form. So I could graph this line now using that information. Let's take a look at another example. Okay, let's say this time the slope is 1/2 and the point is -6, 2. So we're going to use that formula again. I'm going to label my x1, y1, just so I remember which ones are which. And I'm just going to plug them into that formula. So it becomes y minus 2 equals 1/2 times x. And now I have minus a minus. So if you have minus a minus, that becomes plus. So here it changes the sign. So anytime you have a minus, it's going to become a positive because of the formula. It's minus a minus, so it's plus. And so now I can do the same steps that we did before. I distribute the 1/2. So y minus 2 just stays there. 1/2 times x is 1/2 x. 1/2 times 6, when you're multiplying a fraction times a whole number, you take the top number. So I do 1 times 6, and then divide it by 2. So 1 times 6 is 6, divided by 2 is 3. So I multiply the top numbers, and then I divide by the bottom number. And then last step, to get that back into a form that I'm used to seeing, y equals 1/2 x plus 5. So the common mistake here people will make, you have to be very careful with the opposite signs. Because we plugged in -6, it becomes +6 because minus a minus is a positive. And then when you're multiplying with the fractions, just be very careful. Let's look at one more example. This is number 3. Let's say the slope is 0, and your point is -3, -4. So same idea, label your x1 and y1. And now we plug it into the formula. So I have y minus -4, so that becomes y plus 4, equals the slope times x minus -3, which becomes plus 3. So remember, anytime you have a negative, it changes the sign to become positive in the formula because of the minus minus. So now we're going to do the same thing where we distribute the 0, we distribute the slope. 0 times x is 0. 0 times 3 is 0, so I can just write 0 plus 0. So actually with this one, I just have y plus 4 equals 0. Subtract 4. This one is just a horizontal line at y equals -4. And that's using point slope form to come up with an equation of a line. And then you can convert it into point slope intercept form to be able to graph.